Hello, my name is Megan Potente. I'm Co-State Director for Decoding Dyslexia California, and I'm here to talk with you about Senate Bill 691, which will require K-2 universal screening for risk of dyslexia. We have a reading crisis in California. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a highly regarded source for measuring student achievement, 69% of California fourth graders are below proficient in reading, and 42% of California fourth graders are below basic in reading. SB 691 plays a role in addressing this problem and improving reading outcomes for children across California. According to the California Department of Education, the lack of early and accurate identification of students at risk for dyslexia is one of the greatest contributing factors to California's low reading achievement. The National Center on Improving Literacy, a nonprofit that receives grant funding by the U.S. Department of Ed, states there is broad agreement that schools should implement early screening and intervention programs. Broad agreement refers to a very solid body of evidence that has existed for decades and informs education guidance and policy across the country. In fact, all but 10 states already require K-2 universal screening for risk of dyslexia. California is way behind the majority of states in our country. Many states have done this for many years. Texas, another state with a high percentage of multilingual learners, has mandated screening for decades. The purpose of screening is not to diagnose children with dyslexia, but rather identify kids showing early signs of struggle before they fall behind and address their needs in the general education setting. Due to brain neuroplasticity, the most optimum time to learn to read is before age 8. There are roughly 930,000 students on the dyslexia spectrum in California schools, and the majority are served in the general education setting. Only 26% of these students receive special education services. SB 691 will help ensure we identify kids at risk early so we can get them the help they need before they fall behind. Research shows that identifying kids who show signs of difficulty and intervening early before age 8 will reduce the number of students who are placed in special education by up to 70%. Some educators feel that universal screening will take away from valuable instructional time. Research shows the opposite to be true. On average, it takes 15 minutes or less to conduct a screening, and early screening helps to maximize teachers' time by providing immediate feedback on students' strengths and weaknesses that teachers can use to target their instruction. In addition, research shows that it takes 4 times longer to intervene in 4th grade than in late kindergarten and early 1st grade. In California, it costs 3 times more to serve a student in special education than in general education. So for the students at risk for dyslexia who ultimately end up in special education, it will take 4 times longer at 3 times the cost by not screening and early intervening. But even more important than the increased instructional time and increased cost of not screening and intervening early is the damage we are doing to our children. Students at risk of dyslexia, where we fail to intervene early, are 2 to 5 times more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and other social, emotional, and mental health conditions. They are more likely to attempt suicide or express suicidal ideation and have increased risk of substance abuse. They are 4 times less likely to graduate high school, and when you factor in poverty, they are 13 times less likely to graduate high school. They are overrepresented in the homeless populations. They are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated. That fact needs to sink in. We know that we have an estimated 15% prevalence rate of dyslexia in our society. Yet studies of prison populations show a 45% dyslexia prevalence rate. That is a factor of 3x. When we talk about ending the school to prison pipeline, this is a great place to start. The good news is that by recognizing risk and providing early intervention, we can not only improve academic outcomes, but also social, emotional, and economic outcomes as well. So SB 691 will require the State Board of Education to adopt an approved list of evidence-based, culturally, linguistically, and developmentally appropriate screening tools. The bill will require schools to conduct low-cost, brief K-2 universal screenings annually for risk of dyslexia and provide evidence-based literacy instruction, progress monitoring, and early intervention in general ed for students at risk. The bill will consider the needs and strengths of English learners in identifying appropriate screening instruments and practices. SB 691 has new language in it with respect to English learners that wasn't in the previous year's bill. This is a result of speaking with leaders from other states that have existing legislation and listening to concerns from the biliteracy educator community about possibly over-identifying English learners as being at risk of dyslexia through screening when it may in fact be due to other factors surrounding language acquisition. This year's bill has language regarding factors such as home language, language of instruction, and English language acquisition status that should be considered in screening for English learners, as well as language requiring the State Board of Ed adopt screeners that are culturally and linguistically sensitive. The bill also requires that screening results and information will be shared with parents and guardians. And it also has an opt-out option if parents and guardians do not want their child to be screened for risk. SB 691 has 33 co-authors in addition to Senator Portantino, representing diverse and bipartisan support from both urban and rural districts across our state. To our knowledge, no other bill introduced this legislative session has such strong co-authorship. For perspective, the previous year's bill had 16 co-authors, so we have already more than doubled last year's support. The bill also has support from over 50 organizations, including California PTA and Superintendent Thurmond, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the California Department of Ed. Decoding Dyslexia California believes that this strong legislative support of SB 691 represents the increased focus on addressing the critical issue for our children in California. Many people are unaware that there was federal legislation passed in 2018 called the First Step Act, where federal inmates are now screened for dyslexia. The sad irony is not lost on us here, where unlike 40 other states in the nation, California does not require early screening in elementary school when we know we can make the most impact on children's lives, and instead only screen our federal inmates once incarcerated. And we must change this. To close, here's a real-life picture of dyslexia. Please take a look at this writing sample, completed by a 5th grade student whose dyslexia was not recognized early. For the purposes of this exercise, we will refer to this student as Jasmine. Jasmine's difficulties were only identified after years of struggle and after the critical window of time for literacy development had passed. The assignment was to write about a family trip. The spelling is really hard to decipher, so I will read to you what she intended to communicate. I'm going to talk about my Avila Beach trip. So the first thing I did is I got there. Then I had dinner. Then I went to bed. Then the next day I went to my mom and dad's friend's house. Then we had breakfast with them. Then my family went to the beach. Then the next day we went to my mom's friend's house. Then I went to dinner with my family. As is common with many children who have dyslexia, Jasmine's word choice and sentence structure in this writing does not reflect her spoken language. The writing does not represent Jasmine's thinking, the depth of her thinking, her ideas, or her potential. Often, the verbal skills of kids with dyslexia seem worlds apart from what these students are able to produce in writing. This leads to assumptions that students like Jasmine are lazy and not working hard enough. The struggles children with dyslexia experience can be stifling in the classroom and have long-lasting effects. Yet we know their difficulties can be early identified and addressed, setting them on a path to success in school and in life. Please put kids first and support SB 691. Thank you.